And so, there are just 3 weeks to go until the most important election since devolution. Manifestos are published, policies are sharpened, and a pattern emerges. Welcome to Holyrood 2021. Party leaders debate and define the election. It's about independence. The UK government challenges Scottish legislation to protect children. And, shining through the gloom, it's farewell to Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. From Caledonia Media, I'm Charles Fletcher with Scotland's favourite political show, The Week in Holyrood.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments. But he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
I think that the main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
Matin va, Fiske ma. I'll have special coverage of the death of the Duke of Edinburgh later in the Week in Holyrood. First, it's been the week of apologies and moving on. Nicola Sturgeon says she's sorry she took her eye off the ball over drug deaths and pledges to do better if returned to government next month. Douglas Ross is very sorry he was rotten to gypsy travellers and won't do it again. And Alex Salmond is awaiting an apology from Scotland's broadcasters for not giving his Alba party enough coverage. For the record, Mr Salmond has been invited to take part in this programme's special edition with the leaders of Scotland's biggest political parties next week. He's agreed. It was the turn of STV to host a leaders' debate this week. Commentators suggest Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar was again the winner of the night. The SNP's Nicola Sturgeon emerged as the only candidate seriously likely to become First Minister. Douglas Ross focused on calling for list votes rather than constituency. In other words, vote for the Conservatives on your second ballot paper. Patrick Harvie is not leading the Greens towards government but seeks to be a key influence in the next Parliament. Lib Dem leader Willie Rennie brought the calm voice of an old pro. His focus is on recovery and healing. The moderator on the debate is my colleague at STV, Colin Mackay. At times we may well ponder it would be better if we could just vote for him. Into that debate we go then, and here are the pitches from the leaders. We begin with Patrick Harvie for the Scottish Greens.
This election is like no other before it, and not just because of COVID. Unless we act, it may be the last election before the climate crisis spirals beyond our control. The Scottish Greens recognise that this is an election where our future is at stake. We need to act now. We already have the technology and the talent we need here in Scotland to secure our common future. The Scottish Greens will deliver a fair and green recovery that invests in renewable energy, warm homes, public transport and restoring nature. Doing this will create 100,000 green jobs and tackle the climate crisis. Over the last 5 years, the Scottish Greens have got results, delivering policies to improve people's lives, from free bus travel for young people to banning evictions during the lockdown. Imagine how much more we could do if you give us your vote. Time's running out. That's why I'm asking you to vote like our future depends on it. Vote Green.
For the Lib Dems, here's Willie Rennie.
In this campaign, you've heard others say that the priority for the next 5 years should be independence. I disagree. We are still in the wake of the most deadly pandemic. Over 10,000 people have lost their life. Thousands more have lost their job. This is not the moment for another referendum. So Liberal Democrats say, put recovery first. Cut mental health waiting times. Get schools to bounce back to make up for lost education. Create new jobs and act on the climate emergency. It's a big programme that will require us to work together across the country because we will need the skills and talents of everyone to succeed. We need members of the Scottish Parliament who can build bridges and unite people. With my 15 years' experience in Parliament and 10 years leading the Liberal Democrats, I can make this happen. Put the old divisions behind us. Put recovery first. Vote for me and the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross.
The sad passing of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh has reminded us all what's most important in life. Spending time with family and a commitment to building a better future for the next generation. So this is what I think we should all focus on. Restoring local schools, a universal training grant, ending the drug death crisis, better mental health treatment, more police on the streets, faster broadband, creating green jobs. And we can do all of that in this next Scottish Parliament. We can recover from COVID using the strong foundations of the United Kingdom. We can tackle the looming economic crisis. But we won't manage any of that if the SNP get a majority and hold another divisive referendum. So give your party list vote to the Scottish Conservatives and we'll stop them again, just like last time. Let's secure a recovery and start rebuilding Scotland together.
For Scottish Labour, Anas Sarwar.
This isn't an ordinary election. It comes in the midst of a pandemic. Lives and livelihoods are still at risk. At this moment of national crisis, we can't go back to the old arguments, obsessed with egos and settling scores. We can choose something different. We can choose to focus on what unites us as a country, not what divides us. A national recovery can't just be a slogan. It must be our collective national mission. We can choose to restart our economy and give a jobs guarantee to young people. We can choose to restore our children's education system and focus on their mental health. We must renew our NHS so that it never again has to choose between treating a virus or treating cancer. We can do this, but only if we are willing. We all love Scotland, so let's choose to come through this and build a stronger and fairer nation together.
And for the SNP, here's Nicola Sturgeon.
These are really serious times. They demand experienced leadership that only the SNP can offer. In asking you to re-elect me as First Minister, I promise you this: strong leadership to steer the country through the pandemic and a policy programme to kickstart and drive our recovery. A plan that includes a guarantee of jobs, training or education for every young person, 100,000 more affordable homes, action to remobilise and secure the NHS, a new national care service, measures to tackle climate change and lift more children out of poverty. Of course, the only sure way to get a re-elected SNP government is to vote SNP with both votes. At stake is Scotland's future. This election will determine ultimately who decides that future, those of us who live here or Westminster politicians like Boris Johnson. By giving both votes to the SNP, you will secure leadership through COVID, a plan for recovery, and when the crisis is over, the choice of a better future with independence.
During the STV debate, Nicola Sturgeon and Douglas Ross clash over IndyRef 2.
I think it's really important that people judge us on what we do about COVID and not what we say. When the COVID pandemic struck just over a year ago, the first thing I did was to put all planning for an independence referendum on pause so that as First Minister I could focus 100% on steering the country through the crisis, and that's what I will continue to focus on for as long as necessary. What did the Conservatives do? They ploughed on recklessly with Brexit, tearing Scotland out of a transition period against our will, and businesses across Scotland in the teeth of a COVID pandemic are paying the price of that right now. So it's the Conservatives who've been reckless throughout this pandemic. It's the SNP and the government I lead that have sought to steer the country through in a steady way.
Briefly, Douglas, before I go to Holyrood.
No, what was reckless was the SNP introducing a referendum bill in the final days of the last Scottish Parliament. What is reckless is suggesting you could have a referendum and a campaign to separate Scotland from the rest of the UK in our recovery phase, and you can't have both.
Anas Sarwar and Douglas Ross are at odds over campaign policies.
I agree that there's failures of the government, but there's also failures of the opposition. And as you've heard from Patrick Harvie, I'm not sure talking about hate crime is your strongest suit. Over that 5-year period, you've had a Tory MSP suggest there should be a legal limit on how many children someone can have. You yourself refused to vote for Marcus Rashford's summer meals clubs, and you yourself have been forced to apologise for prejudiced views against minorities. Scotland's better than that, isn't it?
I think Scotland can do far better if we as a
Far
parliament...
better than the Conservatives?
No, far better as a parliament working together, focused on our recovery. I think we've all agreed that tonight. That's what we should be focusing on, not issues that you may want to criticise me for, or the SNP or other parties. People are watching at home tonight, worried about their jobs, worried about their future, worried about the NHS service that has, dealt with so much over the last few years, and worried about the future. And when we focus on our recovery, we can have a far more positive future for Scotland than we've had, not just over the last 5 years, but the last 14 years.
But isn't the challenge, Douglas, that you want to talk up division because you want to gain votes?
No.
You don't want to move on from division.
I want us to move on. I'd move on tomorrow if it means we can recover as a country, recover together. From the north of Scotland to the south, east and west, we can do that together if the focus on Parliament, the focus of all MSPs elected next month is on our recovery. That's what we can do. That's what we can do together if we get that focus. That has been the focus of my campaign, and it will continue to be the focus of what I say right across Scotland for the next few weeks, and we can deliver that.
Isn't the reality, Douglas, that you aren't good for the Union, you aren't good for the national recovery, you aren't even good for the Tories? Scotland deserves a better opposition, doesn't it? Scotland deserves a parliament focused on recovery, and that's what we can achieve if we work together over the next few weeks to deliver a party such as Scottish Conservatives to make sure the laser focus on the next parliament is on recovery. We can do that by voting Scottish Conservative.
There will be one more televised debate before the election on the 6th of May, and the next Leaders Special will be right here on this station next week on the Week in Holyrood. The UK government has referred the Scottish Parliament to the Supreme Court, claiming Holyrood has passed bills out with its powers. In the Commons, the SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford called on the Prime Minister to withdraw the legal challenge. The two bills passed unanimously by the Parliament are the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child Incorporation Scotland Bill and the European Charter of Local Self-Government Incorporation Scotland Bill. Boris Johnson's government claims to have concerns over technical aspects that could allegedly place legal duties on UK ministers. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon describes the move as morally repugnant. Ian Blackford told the Prime Minister if he doesn't withdraw, the Scottish Government will see him in court.
The rights of the child, an act passed by the Scottish Parliament, supported by every party, and his government is taking our Parliament, our government, to court. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing technical about this, and the Westminster government wants to strip away the rights of children in Scotland. This is a tale of two governments. We have an SNP Scottish government delivering the baby box, doubling the Scottish child payment, and providing free school meals to every primary school child. At the same time, this Tory government is robbing children of their rights in Scotland. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, the SNP Scottish Government has and will continue to work to ensure Scotland is the best place for a child to grow up. This legal challenge threatens that. It is wrong and it is morally repugnant, Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister commit to withdrawing his legal challenge today? If not, we'll see you in court.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the best thing they can do, as I say, for the rights of the child in Scotland is to improve their shameful record on education and to tackle the issues that matter to the people of Scotland, to tackle the tax regime that they put in place, to do better on fighting crime and drug addiction in Scotland. They should be looking at the issues that really matter, in my view, to the people of Scotland. And instead, they're going into the elections next month, Mr. Speaker, yet again on a campaign to break up this country. That's all they can think of. Break up this country, call for a referendum, break up this country, destroy our country, and call a referendum.
The SNP is promising transformation to the NHS, with spending up by more than 20% over the course of the next Parliament. Nicola Sturgeon says that will total £2.5 billion. And she pledges to hold an independence referendum during the next parliamentary term. But doing so during the pandemic would be what she calls a dereliction of duty.
I set out plans to invest in public services, but Boris Johnson wants to waste vast sums of money on yet more nuclear warheads. I set out plans to lift children out of poverty, but the Tories' welfare cuts and two-child limit are plunging thousands of children deeper into poverty. I've set out our ambition to protect opportunities for young people, But the Tories are cutting those opportunities by ending freedom of movement with Europe. I set out plans for a remobilisation of the NHS, but who knows if our NHS will be safe from the Westminster Brexiteers' desperation for a US trade deal. They've made it clear they will seize any chance they can get to overturn any decisions of the Scottish Parliament that get in their way. They're even going to court to challenge a law passed unanimously in the Scottish Parliament to protect children's rights. Who knows what's next? So there are two very different futures on offer to us. And it is vital that we, the people who live here in Scotland, get to choose which future we want. Let me emphasise this point. I do not propose holding an independence referendum while we are still grappling with the COVID crisis. That would be a dereliction of my duty as First Minister to dedicate all of my energies to leading us through this crisis. But it would also be a dereliction of my duty as First Minister to this and to future generations to let Westminster take Scotland so far in the wrong direction that we no longer have the option to change course. So it is my judgment that the people of Scotland should decide Scotland's future through an independent referendum within the next term of Parliament. It should take place only when the crisis has passed, but in time then to equip our Parliament with the full powers it needs to drive our long-term recovery. And let us be clear about this. If after this election there is a simple democratic majority in the Scottish Parliament for an independence referendum, there will be no democratic, electoral or moral justification whatsoever for Boris Johnson or anyone else seeking to block the right of people in Scotland to decide their own future. I believe passionately that with the powers of independence we can do so much more for Scotland. I look around Europe and I see independent countries of similar size to us that are among the wealthiest, fairest and happiest in the world. If Denmark and Norway and Ireland can do it, then with all of our resources and talent, why not Scotland? But whether or not Scotland becomes independent won't be decided by me or by the SNP or even by the Scottish Parliament. It will happen only when a majority of people who live here in Scotland are persuaded to vote for it. Scotland's future will always be Scotland's choice.
The Scottish Greens also launched their manifesto this week. Many of their platform policies have become mainstream, so their USP or unique selling point has to be the speed at which a green recovery can be delivered. Joint co-leader Lorna Slater says Scotland can and must lead climate change reform.
Our common future sets out a positive programme for government that will secure a green recovery for Scotland. We will invest in Scotland, create jobs, revive industry and build the modern infrastructure the country urgently needs. It is a programme of change because in the face of the climate emergency and the economic fallout from the pandemic, we need change. But it is a programme that will bring everyone along, no one left behind. Let me be clear though, it is bold, it is transformational, but it is also the minimum that Scotland needs to do to keep up with the rest of the world. To emerge from this pandemic and help lead the global transition to a zero carbon society, because around the world, governments are finally seeing the opportunity and they are moving. There will be no second chance when it comes to the climate emergency, and that is why we need to be bold and decisive with our climate action now. Across the Atlantic, President Biden has launched his American Jobs Plan, $1 trillion in infrastructure and jobs, the biggest investment plan seen in the US since the Second World War. In Germany, the green recovery is already being seeded through bold public investment plans. They're spending an extra €1 billion this year alone to upgrade homes and buildings. The EU is making €265 billion available to invest in a green recovery as part of their Recovery and Resilience Fund, and individual member states are adding much more to that. Scotland must not be left behind. In fact, we can and must lead.
As the vaccine rollout continues across Scotland, the First Minister has eased restrictions. The stay-home message that became stay local has now been lifted and we can once again travel out with our own council area. The regulations have also been eased to allow up to 6 adults from 6 households to meet outside, but not yet indoors. It's an acceleration of the roadmap out of lockdown for Scotland, based on better-than-expected coronavirus data. Hospitality remains effectively closed for another 2 weeks until the 26th of April.
We are now extremely confident that those parts of the country currently in level 4 will move to level 3 on the 26th of April. That's now less than 2 weeks away. That means, amongst other things, that on that date shops will fully reopen, pubs, cafes and restaurants will also be able to fully open outdoors on the 26th of April, and indeed they'll be able to open indoors on that day, albeit on a restricted basis. And it's worth noting, I think, that the restricted indoor opening of hospitality on the 26th will be actually 3 weeks ahead of any indoor opening of hospitality in England. So we've considered whether we can bring forward any changes that will particularly boost mental health and well-being. So we focus really on trying as far as possible to give families more opportunity to get together earlier than was planned. So in particular, we've looked at travel within Scotland to see friends and family, albeit outdoors. At the moment, we can't leave our own local authority areas except for an essential purpose, and that rule was due to remain in place until the 26th of April. But the data allows us to make a change to this earlier than that. So from Friday, that's Friday this week, the 16th of April, we will all be able to travel anywhere within Scotland for the purposes of outdoor socialising, recreation or informal exercise. And we are also able to relax the rules for meeting people outdoors again from Friday this week. At the moment, a maximum of 4 adults from 2 households are permitted to meet outdoors. From Friday onwards, that will change to 6 adults from up to 6 households. So that's quite a significant relaxation of that outdoor meeting limit.
You're listening to The Week in Holyrood. I'm Charles Fletcher, and still to come in this half hour.
You're watching BBC News. A short while ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, the Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss."
Holyrood is recalled from election recess to pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh. The co-founder of the SDP, the Social Democrat Party, in 1981 has died. Shirley Williams, one of the most prominent female politicians of her generation, held office in government under Harold Wilson and James Callaghan. She later led the Liberal Democrats in the House of Lords. This from John Craig at Sky News.
She was one of the Gang of Four who attempted to break the mould of British politics. With Roy Jenkins, David Owen and Bill Rogers, Shirley Williams formed the breakaway SDP in 1981, after splitting from the Labour Party that was drifting to the left. In a political career spanning almost 6 decades, she was one of the UK's most popular politicians and once tipped as the country's first woman Prime Minister.
Shirley's courage against a lot of the political opposition she faced shone through, and for a woman, she was especially a trailblazer. You know, she was without doubt one of the greatest female politicians this country's ever seen.
She was a Labour cabinet minister under Harold Wilson and James Callaghan. But after losing her Commons seat in 1979, she stormed back into Parliament in 1981 with a stunning by-election victory in Crosby on Merseyside.
There is no doubt that she should have been the leader of the SDP. She would have been far better than Roy Jenkins and far better than me. I actually was supporting her. I wanted her to stand.
When the SDP failed to achieve a breakthrough, she backed a merger with the Liberal Party and later became the Liberal Democrats' leader in the House of Lords and the darling of party activists. She retired from the Lords in 2016 and 2 years ago she reflected on her career in a Sky News interview.
The most important single thing is to actually address the divisions between parties and within parties that have made the achievement of greater equality, greater fairness, greater justice almost impossible. And to me, that I find that heartbreaking.
Baroness Williams has been described as a trailblazer and pioneer, but ultimately the SDP failed to break the mould. John Craig, Sky News.
Scottish Liberal Democrat leader Willie Rennie says Shirley Williams was great at building bridges between people and he has very good memories of her.
I think I was, when I was a teenager, inspired by Shirley. It was the kind of the early days of the SDP, the kind of brave new force to break the mould of British politics. And she was such a warm, open personality. And that was probably no more evident than years later when she joined me on the campaign trail in Dunfermline for the independence referendum. And there was a Yes supporter who wanted to meet her, and I thought, that's fine. But Shirley spent the next 10 minutes holding her hand, looking into her eyes, intently talking to her about these issues, bridging the divide between yes and no. And I tried to persuade Shirley to try and maybe speak to somebody who might be persuadable. She was having none of it. She said, I'm talking to this lady, and she proceeded to do it for another 10 minutes. I think that's why she was always late to the next event, but so warm and open. And that probably was quite a good example of how she approached her politics. Very interested in people, wanted to build bridges across the divide, bring the society together. And I think she's a massive loss, not just to our party, but I think the whole country as well.
As you know, the Reporter's Notebook is an occasional feature on the Week in Holyrood. In this edition, I recall interviewing Shirley Williams in rather unusual circumstances. The news editor summoned me over to the desk. Shirley Williams is doing a speech tonight. Get an interview with her. That was Ralph Slater at his best. I parked the Evening Echo pool car at the front of the town hall in Hemel Hempstead, Hertfordshire, and went in to find the press officer. It seemed half of Fleet Street was there, all desperate to speak with Shirley Williams. It was 1981. She was part of what we called the Gang of Four. They're the people who were prominent in the Labour Party but broke away to create the SDP, the Social Democrat Party. They are David Owen, Roy Jenkins, William Rogers and Shirley Williams. The SDP was created by those who despaired of Labour at the time, as Margaret Thatcher began her long reign. Back to the town hall. The press officer said it was impossible for me to have an interview. Shirley Williams had to travel immediately after this presentation in Hemel Hempstead to St Albans, some 6 miles away. I was standing in the wings of the stage trying to persuade the press officer to grant me just 3 minutes. No chance, I was told. But how's she getting to St Albans, I asked. The press officer kind of muttered as Shirley approached. Hello, she said. Am I doing a piece with you? I improvised. Yes, if you let me drive you to the next event at St Albans. What a fun plan, she said. She smiled at the press officer, who seemed like fainting. It's fine, I'm happy with it, she emphasised. As her presentation was coming to a close, I nipped out and drove the car to the back door. Shirley Williams appeared from the building and got into the car as the paparazzi rushed over. She lowered the window and hollered out as we drove away, "He's an entrepreneur." So, travelling to St Albans, I got the interview the news editor wanted. I got a front-page splash and a write-off inside. Shirley Williams talked of her agony of leaving Labour and her conviction the SDP would become a vehicle to change British politics for good. The former Education Secretary admitted having many sleepless nights over it, but once she decided to leave, there was no turning back. Some years later, I was in the House of Commons chatting to a couple of colleagues. Out of nowhere, Shirley Williams appeared, came right over to me and said, "Sorry to interrupt, Charles, but I wonder if you could give me a lift to St Albans." His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, has died. He was just a month short of his 100th birthday. Holyrood was recalled from election recess to pay tribute to him.
He was Britain's longest-serving consort, a man who could have gone to the very top of the Royal Navy, but instead chose to sacrifice his career and dedicate most of his adult life to the woman he loved. Born on the Greek island of Corfu, he ended up here at Gordonston School in Scotland, his family having left Greece when he was just 18 months old due to political instability. It was in 1934 that he first met his future wife, when they attended the wedding of his cousin, Princess Marina of Greece, and the Duke of Kent. He was an uncle of Princess Elizabeth. Philip and Elizabeth had in fact shared a unique connection since birth. His mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, was a great-grandchild of Queen Victoria, just like Queen Elizabeth's father. In 1939, 18-year-old Philip joined the Navy. War broke out and Philip was sent to sea, where he became First Lieutenant on HMS Whelp in the Indian Ocean, rescuing British pilots shot down by the Japanese. 2 years after the war ended, he married Princess Elizabeth. Having renounced his Greek title, the King made him Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. In 1952 he was promoted to Commander, but his naval career came to an end on the death of his father-in-law, King George VI. It was left to Philip to break the news to his wife while in Kenya, on a tour of the Commonwealth. At the Queen's coronation in 1953, the Duke took an oath to serve his wife for the rest of his life, swearing to become her liegeman in life and limb. Together they had 4 children, Charles, Anne, Andrew and Edward. But with his naval career over, what to do outside family life? Within 4 years of leaving the Navy, he founded what he is perhaps most famous for.
The main purpose of the scheme is to help boys to find activities which will give them pleasure and satisfaction.
The Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme, which millions of young people have taken part in. He remained active himself.
The Duke plays at back. He's easy to recognise in the match with number 4 on the back of his shirt.
An accomplished polo player.
191 for 5.
A keen cricketer. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he loved sailing. And in his 50s, he turned his attention to carriage driving. Prince Philip's interest didn't stop there. The Duke was a qualified pilot, and he immersed himself in almost 800 charities and organisations, most notably as president of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, long before the protection of the environment became such a hot topic. But his family always came first, and never more so than in 1997, when his grandsons William and Harry lost their mother, Princess Diana, in that Paris car crash. Later that same year, when the Queen and Duke celebrated their golden wedding anniversary, his wife paid him this tribute.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Reflecting on their long and successful marriage, the Duke also paid this compliment to the Queen.
I think that the main lesson that we've learnt is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
Into the new millennium, and though looking more and more frail, the Duke appeared as determined as ever to continue his royal duties, and never without a sense of humour.
Pay attention, because you're now going to see the world's most experienced placard veil.
In May 2017, though, just a month short of his 96th birthday, Prince Philip announced he'd be retiring from public life. At his last official public engagement in the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, he saluted the Royal Marines, of which he was the Captain General. Public appearances after that were few and far between. The Duke looked every bit his 96 years during the Remembrance Sunday service a few months later. The following spring, he underwent a hip replacement. Within weeks, he was back on his feet and seemingly in full spirits at Harry and Meghan's wedding at Windsor Castle. In January 2019, the Duke was involved in a serious car crash near the Queen's Sandringham estate, from which he, remarkably for his age, emerged unscathed. Somewhat reluctantly, he gave up his driving licence, and with it the independence he had always cherished. But still, there were more family weddings to enjoy, and an ever-expanding family. On them and his adopted country, he leaves an indelible mark. A moderniser in the royal household whose appeal transcended the generations, from those who, like him, lived through the war, to the millions of young people who benefited from his award scheme. A man who, above all else, gave up a promising naval career to serve his wife, Queen Elizabeth II, our longest reigning monarch.
Now, inside the chamber at Holyrood, we join the First Minister, leading the tributes.
Presiding Officer, the tributes paid to the Duke of Edinburgh over these last 3 days show the affection in which he was held here in Scotland, across the United Kingdom and indeed around the world. On behalf of the people of Scotland, I express my deepest sympathy to Her Majesty the Queen, who is grieving the loss of her strength and stay, her husband of almost 74 years, and also to the Duke's children and to the wider royal family. Of course, before he became the public figure so familiar to all of us today, the Duke of Edinburgh had already led a life of distinction. Like so many of his generation, he endured difficulties and faced dangers that generations since can barely comprehend. As a naval officer in World War II, he was mentioned in dispatches for his part in the Battle of Matapan. In 1943, his courage and quick thinking helped save HMS Wallace from attack in the Mediterranean. And during a 2-year spell at Rosyth, he was responsible for escorting merchant vessels on a route known as E-Boat Alley because of the frequency of the attacks from German vessels. For these contributions alone, he, like all of our veterans, is owed a significant debt of gratitude. The Second World War was, however, just the beginning of the Duke of Edinburgh's life of public service. From 1947, he was the Queen's constant companion, and from 1952, he was her consort. As has been much noted in recent days, he became the longest-serving consort in British history. That role in a constitutional monarchy cannot be an easy one, particularly perhaps for someone who is spirited and energetic by temperament. And of course, he faced the additional challenge of being the husband of a powerful woman at a time when that was even more of an exception than it is today. That reversal of the more traditional dynamic was highly unusual in the 1940s, 50s and 60s, and even now isn't as common as it might be. Yet the Duke of Edinburgh was devoted to supporting the Queen. They were a true partnership. Indeed, like First Ministers before me, I got to witness the strength of that partnership at close quarters during annual stays at Balmoral. I always enjoyed my conversations with the Duke of Edinburgh on these visits, indeed on all of the occasions that I met him. And I was struck by how different he was in private to the way he was sometimes characterised in public. He was a thoughtful man, deeply interesting and fiercely intelligent. He was also a serious bookworm, which I am too, so talking about the books we were reading was often, for me, a real highlight of our conversations. Prince Philip was, without doubt, a devoted consort to the Queen. But, of course, he also carved out a distinctive individual role. He took a particular interest in industry and science, and he was far-sighted in his early support for conservation. Indeed, as far back as 1969, in a speech here in Edinburgh, he warned of the risks of virtually indestructible plastics. And of course, in 1956, he founded the Duke of Edinburgh Awards Scheme, which now, every year, provides opportunity, hope and inspiration to more than 1 million young people in more than 100 different countries across the world. In addition, the Duke of Edinburgh was patron of more than 800 charities. At the time of his retirement from royal duties, he had completed well over 20,000 engagements. Many of these engagements were, of course, here in Scotland, a country that he loved from a very early age. He was educated in Moray, taught to sail by a Scottish trawler skipper, and, as has been mentioned already, was based at Rosyth for 2 years during the war. When the Duke received the freedom of the City of Edinburgh in 1949, he spoke then of the numberless benefits that Scotland had given him. Some of his very first duties with the royal household were undertaken here in Scotland. In July 1947, just a week after the announcement of his engagement to the then Princess Elizabeth, the couple travelled here to Edinburgh. And in the years since, the Duke has been present at many of the key moments of our modern history, including, of course, the official openings of our Scottish Parliament. He has served many Scottish charities and organisations. Indeed, he was Chancellor of the University of Edinburgh for more than 50 years. Throughout all of that time, the public has held him in great affection. On that first royal visit to Edinburgh in 1947, people gathered just across the street in the forecourt of Holyrood Palace and celebrated the royal engagement with country dancing. More than 70 years later, shortly after he had announced his retirement from public life, I witnessed the warmth of the reception he received as he accompanied the Queen to the opening of the Queensferry crossing. This is an event I had known he was determined to attend. He was fascinated and deeply impressed by the feats of engineering that each of the three Forth bridges represent. Presiding Officer, one of the Duke of Edinburgh's early engagements in Scotland, shortly after the Queen's coronation, was to plant a cherry tree in the grounds of Canongate Kirk, just across the road from here. It stands directly opposite the tree planted by the Queen a year previously. These trees are just about to bloom, as I'm sure they will do each spring for decades to come. I'm equally sure that, not just in the weeks ahead, but many years from now, people will think fondly of the Duke of Edinburgh as they pass Canongate Kirk and look across to Holyrood Palace. It is right that our Parliament pays tribute to him today. In doing so, we mourn his passing and we extend our deepest sympathy to Her Majesty the Queen and her family. We reflect on his distinguished wartime record, his love and support for the Queen, and his decades of public service to Scotland, the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Above all, Presiding Officer, we celebrate and we honour an extraordinary life. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Can I call on Ruth Davidson?
Grief is the price we pay for love. Quoting Dr Colin Murray-Parkes, the Queen was speaking on behalf of the nation when she said those words 20 years ago. Grief is the price that we pay for love. I can't imagine what it is like to be married to someone for 73 years, and I can't imagine what it is to have to get up and face every future day without them, what that absence feels like. And I think the recognition of the enormity of such a loss is what has led so many over the past few days to look past the titles and the 41-gun salutes and have such a sense of feeling for Her Majesty on such a human level. For most of us in this chamber and most outside it, our picture of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh is of an elderly man. Active, yes. Vigorous, yes. Gruff, witty, still able to stand ramrod straight. But by the very fact of reaching 99 years old, a person has been of pensionable age for decades. So for my generation and those coming after, the dashing young naval officer in his 20s, the husband made consort at 30, the palace moderniser intent on propelling post-war Britain to the front ranks in science and research and industry and technology, that Prince Philip only exists in Pathé news footage. Here was a man that was born before the discovery of penicillin, before the creation of the United Nations or the invention of the television or the jet engine. But a moderniser he was in life as well as in work. How many men in the 1950s gave up their job for their wife's career? How many headed the household, making the decisions and smoothing the way? How many walked behind their spouse or accepted that their children would never take their surname? As Barack Obama wrote, he showed the world what it meant to be a supportive husband to a powerful woman. And if that was all he had done, undertaking his vow at the coronation to be her liege man in life and limb, that would have been enough to have recorded his place in history. But it is clear that not only was he a man of huge practical ability, a decorated and talented naval officer, a qualified pilot, a natural sailor and horseman, he also had interests and passions and issues that he wanted to use his position to drive forward, and he focused on engineering, research, youth, the outdoors and conservation. As an exiled prince, he came to Scotland as a boy, and his time here shaped the man that he would become. His relationship with Scotland endured, and it was woven into the service that he gave on behalf of the whole United Kingdom and of the Commonwealth. Presiding Officer, on behalf of myself and my party, let me support this motion of condolence into the life of service of His Royal Highness Prince Philip the Duke of Edinburgh, and let me offer our sincere condolences to his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and to Her Majesty the Queen.
Thank you very much. Can I call Anas Sarwar?
May I associate these benches with the tributes which have been paid to His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. On Friday, we lost an extraordinary public servant who dedicated his long life to our country, as well as transforming lives for young people across the world and promoting the issue of global conservation that we all now recognise is so important. On behalf of the entire Scottish Labour Party, I offer my condolences to everyone in mourning here and across the Commonwealth, all his loved ones, the royal family, his children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and in particular Her Majesty the Queen. For more than 7 decades, Prince Philip was a constant at the Queen's side. None of us can even begin to understand the pressure of being monarch and what has been often described as a lonely job. But we know from all that has been said and written about how much the Queen cherished the support, counsel and love of her husband. And while their lives may have been different to ours, as humans we can all empathise with what it means to lose a loved one. This is hard for anyone, no matter how many years they've been shared together. But the Queen has lost her beloved husband after spending more than 70 years together. I can't even imagine how that must feel, and my thoughts and prayers are with Her Majesty in the difficult times ahead. Presiding Officer, unlike others in the Chamber, I never had the privilege of meeting Prince Philip, so I'm afraid I don't have any personal anecdotes that I can contribute to the wonderful tributes that people have heard today and indeed in recent days. But I was struck by one personal anecdote that some may have heard in recent days on TV and radio. And it came from a man called John Watts, who was jailed at the age of just 17. John recalled there was lots of alcohol and no aspirations for people like me, is what he said. But while in prison, he came across the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which he said gave him a sense of new direction. He camped out for the first award, not on a Scottish mountainside, but in a tent on the artificial grass of a prison football pitch. John went on to get the bronze, silver and gold award while serving a 6-year sentence. The skill he learned during the programme was cooking, and upon leaving prison, he set up his very own catering business, now helping other young people to learn new skills and find new jobs. It saved my life, John said last week. That's just one life that the Prince helped save. There'll be countless others from different walks of life. And actually there are millions of other young people from all walks of life who are reaching their full potential thanks to the Duke of Edinburgh's award, from the Prince's own school at Gordonston to Drumchapel High School and right across the UK and the world. And I'm sure I'm not the only parent who's helped support their children around their mini Duke or junior Dukes or their Duke of Edinburgh awards across the country as well. When Prince Philip launched the awards in 1956, he said if you can get a young person to succeed in any one activity, then that feeling of success will spread over into many others. Presiding Officer, following the difficult year faced by so many young people, with their lives and their learning disrupted by COVID, Prince Philip's words from 65 years ago are just as relevant today, and a reminder of the collective national mission we face in the years ahead to make sure every child fulfils their potential. In closing, may I once again pay tribute to the life of the Duke of Edinburgh and recognise his lasting contribution to our country, express my condolences to everyone mourning his passing, not just his own family, but people right across the country and beyond, and extend my sympathies to everyone who has lost a loved one in this most difficult of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I now call Patrick Harvey?
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I join the other leaders in offering my sincere condolences to Prince Philip's family, his friends and all those who will miss him. In this chamber, as in this country, we do not all share the same views of the monarchy or the same feelings today. It would be wrong to pretend that we did. And as a party which wishes for an elected head of state, we reflected carefully on whether and how we should take part in today's proceedings. But just as it would be wrong to give a performance of feelings not sincerely felt, it would equally be wrong to imply by our absence any kind of personal disrespect to those who have lost someone important to them, whether personally or otherwise. And this has been a year of terrible loss for the world, including up to 150,000 COVID deaths across the UK, most of them announced without ceremony as daily statistics. The toll has been heaviest on those with least. But while there is no great leveller in how we live our lives, we are today reminded that there is no extreme of wealth, privilege or status which can protect us from mortality. Jock Tamson's bairns may be something of a cliché, but in this respect, every human being is indeed equal. Death comes to us all, and every family faces the pain of loss. So regardless of our different views, respect and compassion are due in equal measure to every one of us at such times.
Thank you very much. Can I call Willie Rennie?
I wish to associate myself with all of the fitting tributes from today and over the weekend. I used to wear a badge on my lapel. It was a little blue man. The Duke of Edinburgh spotted it at a reception. He bounced up, demanding to know what it was. To show support for the prostate cancer campaign, I said. He looked at me closely. He says, "Have you got it or are you against it?" Then he bounced off again. The engagement was only 30 seconds long, but it has stayed with me and to be retold numerous times over the years. It seems that he left lasting impressions with so many others too. Some less repeatable than others, but so many were fun and memorable. Sometimes he offended, but I don't share the view of some that he was an offensive man. For so many, he has been part of a family that has provided comfort and stability in what can be a turbulent and intimidating world. Decades of public service through his 99 years with us. His steadfast presence when so much is changing. His support for the Queen, his wife, loyal service to family and country, strength and stay. His weight behind charities, especially the environment. All of those are good things, and we should cherish good things. My two boys have been active in the Duke of Edinburgh Award. Ali worked through all the levels to secure the Gold Award, learning kayaking, volunteering, filmmaking, all sorts of different things. Stephen, he's still working through with expeditions and cooking to our great benefit, but also mountain biking too. His impact on my family has been great. His impact on millions of others has been utterly outstanding. Learning new skills, meeting new people, showing leadership, building teams, maturing, growing. Hundreds of thousands of young people participate in the programme every year in countries across the globe. In Scotland alone, 20,000 started the programme last year. 11,000 achieved awards in that year. The reach is astonishing. It was the Duke of Edinburgh's inspiration all those years ago, and it has blossomed under his leadership, changing lives forever. That's a lasting legacy to be proud of. So to the Queen and to her family, all our thoughts are with you today. For everything, Prince Philip, I think we all say thank you.
As we say goodbye to the Duke of Edinburgh, we go to the closing moments of the Royal British Legion Festival of Remembrance at the Albert Hall. Prince Philip and the Queen actively participate in the evening, not least here in Abide With Me. Her Majesty says his passing leaves a huge void in her life. The man who modernised the royal family has changed hundreds of thousands of lives for the better across the country and the Commonwealth. Philip shone through the gloom. I'm Charles Fletcher. Join me next time for the Week in Holyrood, bringing the Scottish election home. Aeth i ba.